l'une ou l'autre langue. Nous vous encourageons donc à utiliser le bouton d'interprétation au bas de votre écran Zoom. Pour ma part, pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, je suis porte-parole de Fierté Montréal depuis 2020 et j'ai été ambassadrice depuis 2016, dont l'ambassadrice du premier Fierté Canada en 2017. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Duperval. I'm the host and of today's event, Proud to Vote, a national 2S LGBTIQ issues discussion. Welcome. Today's event is brought to you by Consortium of 2S LGBTQ plus organizations, including the Enchanté Network, Fierté Canada Pride, Pride at Work Canada, the Canadian Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity, le Conseil québécois LGBT, the Canadian Rainbow Coalition for Refuge, Justice Trends, the CGLCC, Canada's LGBT plus Chamber of Commerce, Égal Canada, Proud Politics, and Dignity Network Canada. We are equally thankful to the sponsorship and support of Extra Magazine, our media sponsor, and Wisdom to Action, our logistics sponsor for this event. Thank you, everyone. First, some housekeeping details. To use simultaneous translation, please click the globe-shaped box at the bottom right of your utility bar. Live captioning in English can also be activated via your toolbar. We have turned off the chat function, but you're able to message the host if you have any technical issues. Also, please use hashtag Proud2Vote2021 or hashtag Votez fièrement 2021 to join the conversation on social media. A recording of this session will be made available later on YouTube. Our structure for the event today, after a brief opening statement, there will be 6 questions, with each party afforded 2 to 3 minutes to answer each question in their language of choice. The questions were developed by the organizations presenting today's event. There's no space for cross-examination. And we would ask candidates to not interrupt or jump in on one another. And today is an opportunity for 2S LGBTIQ communities to hear directly from the parties on their positions and platforms in relation to specific 2S LGBTIQ issues in the federal election. A reminder, don't hesitate to jump on social media and share hashtag Proud2Vote or hashtag Votez fièrement. Before I ask the candidates to identify their party, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Tiohtià:ke, Kanien'kehá:ka unceded territory, also called Montreal, and who was a Mohawk and is a Mohawk territory. Many wrongs have been done to the Indigenous communities and are unfortunately still ongoing. So it's of most importance to pay our respects to the First Nations, recognizing our privilege as settlers and taking actions towards reconciliation. This event is taking place virtually on what is known colonially as Canada. And throughout this election, the ongoing realities of colonialism and white supremacy on this land have been under-acknowledged and under-addressed. So I would encourage everyone here to reflect on the land upon which we all reside and our responsibilities and commitments, particularly if we're settlers to the land, to Indigenous solidarity and advancing justice and reconciliation. To begin, we would like to invite each party representative to introduce themselves and provide opening remarks on their party's commitments to 2S LGBTQ plus communities. We ask the speakers to keep their remarks brief, and we will have time to get into the issues in the questions. I also want to acknowledge that 2S LGBTQ plus communities across Canada are very diverse, and there are many issues impacting all of them differently. So we know we won't be able to touch everything in our limited time today, from the continued blood ban, the HIV criminalization, police violence against our communities, high rates of homelessness and poverty, the continued practice of invasive, non-consensual, and medically unnecessary surgeries on intersex children. There are so many issues, and we hope that the candidates will be able to touch on the ones that are most important for their parties to address if elected. Donc, pour commencer, en 2 minutes chacun, pourquoi les communautés 2S LGBTQ devraient-elles voter pour votre parti lors des prochaines élections? Donc, je vais vous demander, par ordre alphabétique, premièrement, parce que nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir aujourd'hui, les représentants de tous les grands partis ayant un siège à la Chambre des communes à Ottawa. Nos intervenants aujourd'hui sont Hannah Hudson du Parti conservateur du Canada, Marie-Hélène Gaudreault du Bloc québécois, Randall Garrison du Nouveau Parti démocratique du Canada, Rob Oliphant du Parti libéral du Canada et Sylvain Daudier du Parti vert du Canada. Bienvenue à vous. So I would like to ask Hannah Hudson to begin.
Thank you so much. I'm Hannah Hodgson, the Conservative candidate for the riding of Victoria. I come to you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations on what is now Vancouver Island. Many people throughout this campaign have asked me why I'm running as a Conservative. And the simple answer is because Canada's recovery plan is the best plan to bring us out of the pandemic and into a brighter future. Many things in this platform really stand out to me as speaking directly to the needs of the LGBTQ community. First of all, specifically that, I think Conservatives have a reputation for being practical and getting things done, and we will get done things like ending the blood ban, something that the current government has campaigned on many times and that still is in place as homophobic and transphobic policy. We will, as soon as possible, as stated in our platform, ban conversion therapy. I'm proud. I will be excited as an MP to vote in favor of doing so. Additionally, I think, as we know, LGBTQ Canadians face much higher rates of the challenges that face all of us. Issues like affordability, issues like homelessness, issues like poverty. They disproportionately affect our community. And so addressing those is incredibly important to helping our community. Building 1 million homes over the next 3 years will help alleviate homelessness and give people places to live. And again, because our community faces higher rates of homelessness, that will help. Building our economy, growing our economy, making sure gig workers are protected in terms of benefits. Having a mental health action plan, because I can speak from my own personal experiences how important mental health resources were for me and how important they are for so many Canadians, especially in the LGBTQ community. And making sure that we do everything we can to listen to the community and the diverse voices within it, and have an open government that listens and engages and frankly does what is promised. So that's why I'm proud to be a Conservative. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of my identity as a queer trans woman. I'm proud to be a Conservative candidate. And I'm very proud to be here today as part of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Hudson from the Conservative Party of Canada. Now I'd like to introduce Marie-Hélène Gaudreault du Bloc québécois.
Bonjour à vous tous, à vous toutes, à vous tous. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici. Puis félicitations, en fait. Je vais essayer de parler pas trop rapidement. Merci beaucoup à l'interprétation. Non seulement ça me fait plaisir d'être là, mais ça donne aussi une occasion d'échanger pour faire le portrait de ce qui s'est passé, particulièrement dans la dernière législature. Donc, moi, je suis une jeune femme issue du milieu communautaire qui a décidé de m'engager comme parlementaire pour m'assurer, en fait, qu'il existe non seulement un dialogue avec particulièrement la communauté LGBTQ2S+, mais que le dialogue fait en sorte qu'on puisse mieux vivre ensemble. Et ça a été mon dossier dans la dernière année. Évidemment, le rôle de chaque parlementaire est teinté aussi de valeurs profondes auprès de chaque individu. Et évidemment, mais le Bloc québécois, ce sont les Québécoises et les Québécois qui iront aux urnes pour que le Bloc soit fort. Et j'ai bien hâte de vous présenter, en fait, les mesures qu'au Québec, nous avons pris les devants. Je suis extrêmement fière. Vous le voyez, je suis une fière alliée. Je suis très fière de ce qui s'est fait dans les dernières décennies au Québec. Et j'en pourrais faire la démonstration à quel point nous sommes inclusifs. Bon, Siri me parle et me dit qu'il me reste 30 secondes. Donc, j'ai hâte de discuter avec candidats, députés sortants, tout ça, pour mieux vous outiller. Parce que quand on parle d'inclusion, c'est un sujet qui est très délicat. Et j'apprécie les questions que vous avez mises en valeur. Et évidemment, je souhaite grandement que ça va vous permettre de vous éclairer. Et à la fin, vous aurez le choix pour tous ceux et celles qui vivent au Québec de bien comprendre à quel point nous sommes en harmonie et dans l'ouverture du dialogue pour compléter ce qui malheureusement n'est pas fait au Canada, mais que les devants ont été faits au Québec depuis longtemps. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Hélène Gaudreault du Bloc québécois. I'd like to introduce Randall Garrison du Nouveau Parti démocratique du Canada. I just want to make sure Randall can hear us. Hi, Randall. I believe your mic is muted.
Are we good? I think we're
Yes,
good.
we are. Thank you so much.
Well, good morning from the West Coast. I'm Randall Garrison, NDP candidate in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, and I'd like to thank Hannah for doing the land acknowledgement for the territory we both are coming from today. So let's not kid ourselves. Our 2S LGBTQ plus community is still subjected to ongoing and pervasive discrimination. And we see the continued marginalization of many members of our community, especially those who are transgender, non-binary, racialized, and Indigenous. We are more likely to be unemployed or underemployed, and among youth, we are far more likely to be in precarious housing or homeless. While some progress has been made, especially for cisgendered white men like myself, we still have a lot more work to do to make sure that everyone in our community is treated fairly, able to access the services they need, and able to live free from hate and threats of violence. And I do want to stop for a moment here to specifically call out the vile hatred aimed at trans women during this campaign in Ottawa-Vanier. It's time to put a stop to public policies and practices that directly contribute to homophobia, biphobia, transphobia by defining us as other or as broken and in need of fixing. I began working to end the blood ban when I first was elected, and I've been told for 10 years now that we need more research, more consultation, more whatever before we can get the job done. The Liberals joined me by promising an end to the ban in 2015, and the Conservatives joined up last year. But now, once again, we are being told this will happen soon. Right. When this Parliament was adjourned early for this unnecessary election, the bill to ban conversion therapy died in the Senate, as we all know. On day one, when it was introduced in 2020, as NDP SOGI spokesperson, I offered to expedite the bill, but the Liberals dragged their feet for reasons known only to themselves and never took up our offer. So we are stuck with this fraudulent and harmful practice continuing in Canada, despite the harrowing testimony we heard from survivors about its impact. So am I impatient? Yes, I am. But as a New Democrat, am I ready to get back to work fighting for us in the next Parliament? Hopefully, with quite a few more queers alongside me. You bet I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Randall Garrison from the NDP Party of Canada. I would like to introduce Rob Oliphant du Parti libéral du Canada.
Thank you very much. And again, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking today from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is also under Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, a treaty which needs to continue to be respected. I also want to acknowledge that we are still in a pandemic. COVID-19 has affected every one of us who's on this call today, and it is affecting the 2S LGBTQ2I+ community profoundly, both here in Canada and around the world. And I think it has revealed certain fault lines in our society, both economically and in terms of healthcare. And those are part of the agenda items that we want to have addressed in this campaign, as well as in a new parliament. There has been work done, obviously, and I know it's already been acknowledged that progress has been made on behalf of our community. As a gay man, I recognize that, yes, with Randall, I have been probably ahead of receiving of rights and compared to other parts of our community, but we've seen steady progress. And we've seen the old gay rights movement move to the lesbian and gay rights movement, to the lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights movement, and then to the trans movement. And we are at the cusp now of trying to broaden this to the whole queer community of Two-Spirited and all community members to recognize that we are in this together and need to work together. I also want to echo what Randall said with respect to trans people. My campaign manager in this event is a trans woman, and I have never heard the vitriol and the condemnation of that community as I have in this time. And it is one of those areas that we need to continue to work in. So I'm looking forward to this afternoon. We'll get into the issues profoundly, and I am very thankful that the organizers have gathered today to talk about these important issues, and will contribute as we continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant from the Liberal Party of Canada. J'aimerais introduire Sylvain Daudier du Parti vert du Canada.
Bonjour tout le monde. Alors, je suis très heureux d'être là. Je suis en direct de Saint-Isidore de Clifton, un tout petit village des cantons de l'Est situé sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé de la Confédération Abénaquis et Wabanaki. C'est un petit geste que de le dire, mais je pense que ça passe par des petits gestes quotidiens si on veut vraiment œuvrer à la réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones. Je suis né dans ce petit village. J'y vis depuis 15 ans avec mon conjoint, dans une maison intergénérationnelle avec ma mère qui a 94 ans et avec ma sœur aussi. Si je vous raconte tout ça, c'est que je pense qu'une réelle politique du prendre soin doit s'ancrer dans le quotidien de nos vies, l'individuel dans ce qu'il a de collectif. Et c'est pour cette raison-là que je suis candidat pour le Parti vert du Canada. Outre une plateforme ponctuelle d'une campagne électorale, le Parti vert du Canada est fondé sur 6 valeurs fondamentales qui encadrent toutes nos réflexions, nos analyses et nos interventions. Et je vais prendre le temps de vous les nommer parce que c'est rare qu'un candidat peut vous dire « mon cadre théorique, il est celui-là ». Alors, c'est le respect de la diversité, valeur fondamentale, la sagesse écologique, la notion de durabilité, la justice sociale, la non-violence, et Dieu sait qu'on en a besoin par les temps qui courent, et la démocratie participative. Donc, la réalité, c'est que la haine, elle est en hausse au Canada présentement. Les doctrines de suprématie raciale et religieuse sont une menace réelle qui sont très présentes. Il est primordial en 2021 encore de garantir un soutien adéquat aux communautés et je peux vous en témoigner à notre communauté. Je peux vous en témoigner moi-même puisque j'ai dû moi-même porter plainte contre la police la semaine dernière. On se reparle tantôt.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvain Daudier du Parti vert du Canada et à tous les candidats. Bienvenue à tous, à toutes qui nous rejoignent en ce moment. First off, I would like to welcome Albert McLeod of the Two-Spirited Peoples of Manitoba to ask the first question. Albert?
Thank you, Sandy. The first question regards on November 28, 2017, Prime Minister Trudeau apologized to LGBTQ Canadians for state-sponsored discrimination, and as a leader of Canada, he promised this type of oppression would not happen again. Despite all of the recent discussion from the Canadian government about survivors of Indian residential schools, there has been an almost complete omission of the impacts these schools had on Two-Spirit Indigenous LGBTQ+ survivors. This has meant that we have had to witness a complete heteronormative perspective of the students, about the students who were forced to attend these schools. How will your party ensure the inclusion of Two-Spirit Indigenous LGBTQ+ people, not only in conversations about residential schools, but in all discussions and policy decisions impacting Indigenous communities?
To respond, we'll go in reverse order from introductions. So we will start with Sylvain from the Green Party. Then Rob Oliphant from the Liberals, Rendell Garrison from the NDP, and Marie-Hélène from the Bloc Québécois, and finally Hannah Hudson from the Conservative Party.
Donc, je peux y aller.
Et,
J'ai 2 minutes ou 3 minutes finalement?
entre 2 et 3 minutes.
2 et 3 minutes. Bien, écoutez, je pense que le premier moyen de laisser une place aux personnes LGBTQI2S+, autochtones, ben, c'est de reconnaître la place. Donc, au Parti vert du Canada, nous, on entend mettre en œuvre la Déclaration des États-Unis sur les droits des peuples autochtones pour les Premières Nations qui l'appuient. On réaffirme aussi et on appuie la mise en œuvre des recommandations de la Commission Vérité et Réconciliation et aussi du rapport final de l'enquête sur les femmes et les filles autochtones disparues et assassinées. Alors ça, c'est un truc fondamental au départ. Après, je pense qu'il faut garantir l'accès à des soins de santé sexuelle complets et à des soins de santé d'affirmation de genre, y compris les traitements hormonaux et bloqueurs, ainsi que les chirurgies de confirmation de genre. On doit intervenir pour aider autant les Two-Spirit que toute la communauté. Interdire et condamner la pratique d'intervention chirurgicale médicalement inutile sur les enfants intersexués. Je pense que ça va de soi pour moi. Veiller à ce que les personnes trans, non-binaires, bispirituelles puissent, sans avoir recours à la chirurgie, modifier leur désignation de sexe sur tous les documents officiels délivrés par le gouvernement fédéral, en conformité à leur identité. On doit veiller à ce que le recensement national soit conçu de manière à refléter les diversités des identités sexuelles et de genre. Exiger un truc aussi simple que des installations accessibles dans tous les édifices fédéraux, y compris les toilettes, les vestiaires, pour que les personnes trans, non-binaires, bispirituelles utilisent les installations qu'elles désirent. On doit financer, je pense de façon très urgente, des programmes communautaires d'éducation et de sensibilisation qui mènent à une meilleure compréhension des réalités intersexes, mais aussi des programmes d'aiguillage pour diriger les personnes trans, non-binaires et bispirituelles vers les services appropriés. De plus, nous, on appuie l'application des recommandations du rapport Fonds Purge LGBT, qui est intitulé « Lendemain de la purge » sur l'importance de la discrimination vécue dans les lieux de travail fédéraux. Je pense que ça commence à vous faire un portrait un peu de là où le Parti vert, qui est un allié depuis toujours des communautés LGBTQI2S+, là où on veut aller.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvain. J'aimerais maintenant passer le micro à Rob.
Thank you very much. And I think it's a really important question. It's a broad question, and it's as broad as it is important. I don't think any federal government in Canadian history can be completely proud of its work and its agenda with respect to Indigenous peoples in this country. All of us have failed. And we are continuing to grow in that people-to-people, nation-to-nation relationship. And that includes now Two-Spirited and Indigenous LGBTQI people who may not identify as Two-Spirited. I think that the cracks that are being revealed continually with respect to systemic racism, with respect to whole categories of people who have been left out of the conversation are incredibly important for us to keep opening up. And that's why one of the first things that we did as a government after many years of a conservative government, which failed to look at missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, we established that commission and have a roadmap now, which we will accelerate after this election to ensure that happens. We're trying to include at every table that we work on Indigenous people of every background and every orientation and every identity. That means including them in our action plan, which many of the groups that are sponsoring today's event have been a part of, bringing to that table the tragic history of residential schools, the resulting effects of those residential schools on mental health, on addictions, and on other parts of our community which remain broken. We need to continue to do that. We are committed to doing that, and we're committed to putting money into that as well, bringing voices to the table, working with instead of for or to Indigenous communities, and continuing to do it. I think that the voices of Two-Spirited and other LGBTQI Indigenous peoples need to be heard more strongly, and I'm looking forward to being part of a leadership a group in doing that, and welcome comments all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant. I would like to have give the mic to Rendell Garrison from the NDP party.
Well, thanks very much. I think we as a community have some trouble acknowledging and remembering that First Nations cultures, Indigenous cultures, in fact, as a whole, recognized diverse concepts of gender and sexuality prior to colonization. And certainly, if we have that problem, then the government has that problem in spades. And so what we have to do here is to lift up the voices of diverse members of our community. And when we say that, it means we have to provide the resources necessary for those people from our community to participate in all the various discussions that are going on and to help lead the implementation of the many recommendations that we already have. In April of 2021, the working group, which calls itself 2S LGBTQIA+, put forward a very good action plan. And it has a very important principle stated at the beginning, which we've all heard before, and that is nothing about us without us is for us. And so this is an area we have so much more work to do in as a community ourselves, and the government has so much more work to do. It's not an area I've done enough work in, frankly, and I'm committed to working with those members of our community in the next parliament so that they can lead us forward in implementation of the many recommendations, not just of that action plan, but of the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 231 calls to justice from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. So this election gives us a chance to elect more out members of parliament and out members of parliament who are more diverse. To this day, we've had only 2 out lesbian members of parliament and never a transgender, non-binary, or Two-Spirit MP. Right now, of course, all 4 of the out MPs are cisgendered white men. Drawn from that group in our community, let's face it, that hasn't always been the best friends of other members of our community. And though Rob, Seamus, Eric, and I have all made our own commitments to do better, better would actually mean electing more diverse voices from our community to the House of Commons. Thanks.
Thank you, Rendell Garrison. Moving forward, I would like to ask all the speakers to speak slowly for the interpreter if possible. Now I'd like to introduce Marie-Hélène from le Bloc québécois.
Oui, bonjour, merci Sandy. D'entrée de jeu, je vous expliquais tantôt comment il est important de connaître les personnes derrière leur rôle, c'est-à-dire en fonction de leurs valeurs. Et quand je parle particulièrement aux gens qui me représentent, mais aussi aux Québécoises et Québécois. Et quand je mentionnais « nous sommes dignes », et je me réjouis en fait, quand on pense à l'accès à l'union de fait, l'union officielle de 2 personnes de même sexe, c'est pas en 2021 que cela a été changé au Québec. C'est depuis 1995. Et sans vouloir pointer du doigt les gouvernements précédents, j'aimerais outre que les promesses, les engagements, j'aimerais ça connaître, en fait, comment se fait-il qu'en 2021, la réforme de la loi qui arrive à son 150e anniversaire sur la loi sur les Indiens, je ne comprends pas. Donc, j'ai besoin qu'on m'explique. J'ai besoin aussi qu'on m'explique que quand on se dit qu'il faut aborder le dialogue et de comprendre les enjeux de chacun, que lorsqu'on parle de projets spécifiques, c'est toujours en bas de la liste. Quand on entend les gens de chez nous dire « cessons la discrimination », et je peux vous le dire, parce que même au Québec, on en vit, donc je peux très bien comprendre, par les temps qui courent, c'est assez important. Alors, le dialogue, c'est dans l'ouverture, mais c'est aussi dans le leadership, de prendre en main les dossiers et d'aller au-devant. Donc, les gouvernements précédents, malheureusement, ont posé des gestes, qu'on en parlera un petit peu plus tard. Il y a beaucoup de promesses. 2015, il y avait beaucoup d'engagements. Quels sont-ils? La seule chose que je peux dire aujourd'hui, c'est que pour le C6, qui est l'interdiction de la thérapie de conversion, ben, vous savez, chacune et tous de vous, ben, quand il y a une élection, ben, tout tombe au feuilleton. Donc, on y arrivait, mais malheureusement, on n'avait pas l'appui de 50% des conservateurs, mais le Parti libéral avait bien compris que ça devait cesser. Donc, je pense que ça serait pertinent que les gens, dans notre dialogue, on puisse s'inspirer des bonnes pratiques. Et au Québec, j'en ferai pas la démonstration complète, mais il faut agir. Alors, j'ai bien hâte d'entendre les gestes concrets et les vraies promesses. Merci.
Merci, Marie-Hélène du Bloc québécois. And finally, Hannah Hudson from the Conservative Party.
Thank you so much. This is a very important question. I talk a lot about being trans, being a queer trans woman, because those are my lived experiences. I don't obviously have the lived experience of someone who's Two-Spirit or Indigenous person, because those are not my lived experiences. So my job as a prospective member of parliament and a prospective politician is to listen, is to bring those voices in, bring those diverse voices in to the conversation, because as we all know, for too long, the government hasn't represented or looked like the population, and we need to do better. And that is a big reason why I'm running, is to try to make at least a small difference in making sure that there are more diverse voices being heard. So my commitment is to do everything I possibly can to bring Two-Spirit in distinct Indigenous identity and Indigenous communities and people into a conversation and find out what they need, what are their needs, and how can government serve them better. Because frankly, that is a conversation that is very long overdue, and we constantly need to be making sure that at every level and every day, that government of all levels is serving the interests of the people and is doing what they can to assist people, vulnerable people in our society. So my commitment is to do everything I can to bring those voices in and not speak over and not pretend I have those lived experiences that I don't have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. My apologies. Thank you, Hannah Hudson from the Conservative Party. Next up, I'd like to introduce Justin Kahn, Director of Public Interest and Legal Initiatives at the 519 Church Street Community Center in Toronto and representative of the Enchanté Network, to ask our next question.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandy, and good afternoon, candidates. The question is, over the previous 6 years, the Liberal government has committed unprecedented funds to a 2S LGBTQ+ capacity fund, and in the months before the election has consulted with our communities to develop the first ever national LGBTQ2+ action plan. Both of these initiatives are essential to continued progress for 2S LGBTQ+ people in Canada. Does your party commit to continuing the LGBTQ+ capacity fund and implementing the national LGBTQ2+ action plan?
Thank you so much, Justin. This time around, we'll start with Rendell Garrison and then move on to Hannah Hudson, followed by Marie-Hélène Gaudreau, Sylvain Daudier, and finally Rob Oliphant.
Okay, thanks. I'll try to go a bit slower here, but as always, I've got way too much to say today. Capacity building for queer organizations, especially those who represent the most marginalized in our community, is obviously very important work. But the things called action plans are usually about capacity building, consultation, and research, meaning they often end up with precious little action in them. So yes, I support an action plan. And yes, let's double the current capacity building fund on an annual basis and make sure it provides at least the minimum resources that organizations burn up in working with government rather than actually delivering services. Then let's move on to doing actual things, like eliminating HIV/AIDS by quickly expanding the pilot programs to make testing and treatment more widely accessible for men who have sex with men in racialized, indigenous, and rural communities, and ending the criminalization of HIV. Let's move on to providing shelter for homeless youth that also provides trauma-informed counseling and employment and training programs so youth can access the resources they need to allow them to move forward on their own steam. Like providing resources to conversion therapy survivors so they can offer, their organizations can offer the trauma-informed counseling programs they need to begin the healing process. And like fulfilling the promise of Bill C-16 of equal rights for trans and non-binary Canadians by making sure that gender-affirming medical procedures and care are available to all in this country, no matter where they live and know how big their wallet. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wendell Garrison. Now let's move on to Hannah Hudson, please.
Thank you for the question. And I want to agree with Randall that a problem with this Liberal government is that they are very good at announcing plans and secretariats and things that work with consultants and government relations people. But when the rubber meets the road, how are things actually being improved? And that is a huge problem. And one example I'd like to point out specifically, as you mentioned, may come up today, is the blood ban. Because for 3 elections now, the Liberals have promised to remove it, and it is still in place. And one aspect that I think this is a good example of, we announce action plans, but this is a concrete thing that can really make a difference in people's lives that has not been done. As a trans person, Canadian Blood Services rules are incredibly transphobic. And, we see a lot about men who have sex with men, but Canadian Blood Service, despite my birth certificate saying female, Canadian Blood Service considers me a male. And they will only consider me a female when I've, sorry for the TMI, gotten bottom surgery. That is an antiquated and transphobic way of looking at gender and looking at identity and needs to change. It's 2021, that shouldn't be in place. And so these are the kind of things that action plans are great. Capacity building is great, but we need to make sure that we are doing the things that Canadians need and our community needs that we can do. The government could have done this. They had a majority. They had supportive partners in Parliament. They could have done this. They chose not to in order to use this election wedge. I will commit as an MP to doing everything in my power to stop the blood ban and to stop these homophobic and transphobic policies within government, because they frankly have no place in our society.
Thank you, Anna Hudson. Now I'd like to ask Marie-Hélène Gaudreau for her remarks.
Merci beaucoup. Mais d'entrée de jeu, je vous expliquais que non seulement je suis et nous sommes le Bloc québécois des alliés et nous le serons. On a démontré à la Chambre des communes qu'à chaque fois, lorsqu'on entend les besoins, les soucis de chaque communauté, nous allons être en faveur. Il n'y aura jamais, vous ne verrez jamais à l'intérieur même des valeurs du Québec, de nos intérêts, une disparité auprès du caucus. Alors ça peut rassurer beaucoup les gens. Et le modèle qu'on vit au Québec le démontre tellement. Quand on parle, entre autres, dans la question comment on peut aider les organismes communautaires, on le sait tous que chaque organisme a besoin d'air pour s'occuper de leur mission. Ces organismes-là qui se retrouvent partout au Canada passent par la santé physique, la santé mentale, Et ce que ça me dit, c'est que de façon variable, en fonction des souhaits de chaque province, et vous le savez qu'au Québec, c'est une grande priorité avec l'ensemble des lois que nous avons mis sur pied depuis les décennies. Donc, quand le prochain gouvernement annoncera officiellement un transfert en santé, lorsque chaque collectivité, sans condition, pourra agir directement pour les organismes communautaires, pour créer le dialogue. Ce sont les gens qui sont sur le terrain qui vont nous permettre d'éveiller la collectivité et de réduire la discrimination. Avant ça, il y a un grand travail de dialogue qu'on a à faire entre parlementaires pour plein de sujets qui sont très délicats. Malheureusement, on n'a pas pu compléter pour ce qui est des thérapies de conversion et je me questionne aussi sur la solidarité des différents caucus. Donc, la démonstration a fait en sorte que malheureusement, ce n'est pas toujours ça qui se passe. Donc, pour moi, ça passe par un transfert en santé sans condition où chaque organisation pourra interpeller leur juridiction de chaque province et d'avoir concrètement un plan. Ça leur appartient, c'est eux qui ont l'expertise et non pas nous au fédéral. Merci.
Merci Marie-Hélène Gaudreault. Maintenant, place à Sylvain Daudier.
Écoutez, on en a parlé tantôt. Le Canada a beau avoir présenté des excuses aux Canadiens et aux Canadiennes appartenant aux communautés LGBTQI2S+, en 2017. La ministre de la Diversité et de l'Inclusion de la jeunesse a beau avoir enclenché en février 2021 la première activité de mobilisation autour du plan d'action. 25 000 personnes ont répondu au sondage. Je pense qu'il faut accélérer un peu le processus, là. La lettre de mandat date de 2019. La première action a été menée en février 2021. Oui, il y a la pandémie, oui, il y a la crise climatique. Raison de plus pour accélérer, parce qu'en période de crise, les droits de la personne, c'est ce qui est toujours le plus attaqué. Personnellement, je suis en faveur des consultations, je n'ai aucun problème, il faut rassembler les gens, mais on doit quand même agir rapidement. Quand 39 personnes, des répondants et des répondantes dans l'étude qu'on a eue là, déclarent vivre des violences, que ce soit des violences verbales, harcèlement en ligne et ainsi de suite, tout ça pendant qu'on vient de déclencher une élection au lieu d'agir. Alors, je pense que c'est important d'agir. Donc, en plus de financer des programmes communautaires, comme je disais tantôt, d'éducation et de sensibilisation, il faut établir un programme de financement clair au sein de Santé Canada pour soutenir les organisations communautaires offrant des programmes ciblés sur la santé mentale, le bien-être pour les jeunes LGBTQI2S+, y compris la prévention du suicide, le soutien par les pairs, le coming out et le conseil. Et on doit demeurer réaliste. En raison de la pyramide des âges au Canada, ça nous oblige aussi, dans tous les programmes de soutien à la communauté, à envisager de manière plus spécifique la protection des aînés LGBTQIS2+, dont je fais partie, puisque je fais partie de l'âge d'or, moi. C'est important d'intervenir rapidement. Prendre 1 an pour consulter les différents organismes, là, faut pas exagérer quand même. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvain Daudier. Et maintenant, place à Rob Oliphant.
Thank you, Sandy. And I've almost forgotten what the question is that Justin asked. It has not been answered. In a word, Justin, yes. In a word, thank you for the acknowledgement of the unprecedented core funding, which has built capacity in LGBTQI groups across this country. It was started in 2019 by Minister Monsef. We have in our platform a commitment to continue that funding, $10 million a year for core funding. There's project funding, there's all kinds of other funding that's available, but capacity funding is absolutely critical so that groups can grow and get multiplier dollars from provincial or city governments, from outside groups. Absolutely critical. And there's not a penny mentioned in the Conservative platform, $0 for this kind of work, which is absolutely critical. And I want to give a shout out to Enchanté as well. This is a network of organizations coast to coast to coast that is building our community. I want to close though with a different comment, and that is that I'm watching some of the chat and some of the vitriol that's there, and this campaign has been the nastiest campaign I've ever seen. What I want to say is Randall and Eric and Seamus and I may disagree on timing and on all sorts of things about our rights and the way we're moving ahead. I have never doubted Randall's sincerity, his integrity. I have never failed to ask for his advice when we're trying to do something as a government. We will work together. That is the nature of what our community needs to do. We need to build bridges with each other and continue to do that and not hit people and beat them down. That is what we're trying to do. And I want to give that shout out. And it's pretty tough for Eric Duncan in the Conservative Party when over half his caucus voted against the ban on conversion therapy, when so few of them supported Bill C-16 on trans rights. It is a tough place. So I will support Eric as well as a person trying to do something, but it's going to be a tough club if Hannah joins that club because they are not there. They're not there with money. They're not even there with words. They're still fighting battles from the 20th century. We need to move into the 21st century. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do that with members of the Green Party, members of the NDP, members of the Bloc that want to make our country a better place. And I'll even help those who may get a seat in the Conservative network, which is simply stuck in an old world. We're in this together, folks. We've got to be friends. We've got to work together and build a better community and make sure that those voices are heard. So back to Justin, yes, it's in our platform, it's guaranteed, and it's a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant. Je suis très heureuse de vous présenter Shiba Akpokli, and I'm sorry if I mispronunciate your name, coordonnatrice des services aux membres du Conseil québécois LGBT, qui posera une question sur la thérapie de conversion.
Merci beaucoup, Sandy. Je te confirme que tu as très bien prononcé mon nom. Ma question est la suivante. Sachant que le projet de loi visant à interdire les thérapies de conversion est mort au feuilleton cet été, on aimerait mieux connaître votre plan pour mettre fin à ces pratiques nocives et dangereuses. Plus précisément, pouvez-vous nous confirmer si une interdiction de thérapie de conversion introduite par votre parti couvrirait à la fois les pratiques de conversion basées sur l'identité de genre et l'orientation sexuelle? Et bien plus qu'on est consciente et conscient qu'une interdiction soit un pas important dans la bonne direction, mais il faut reconnaître qu'une interdiction est toutefois insuffisante pour s'attaquer pleinement à ces gros enjeux-là. On aimerait aussi savoir ce que vous allez faire pour soutenir les survivantes et les survivants de pratiques de conversion et pour vous assurer que ces pratiques horribles soient totalement éradiquées. Merci.
Merci, Shiba. Ce tour, nous allons commencer par Randall Garrison, ensuite Hannah Hudson, Rob Oliphant, Marie-Hélène Gaudreau et ensuite Sylvain Daudier.
Well, thanks very much for this important question. And of course, if reelected, one of the first things I would get busy on is making sure we get the conversion therapy legislation over the finish line. This is something I've been calling for since 2015 as the NDP SOGI spokesperson. The Liberals spent 4 years from 2015 to 2019 telling us this was a provincial responsibility before their sudden conversion in the 2019 election campaign to saying maybe the federal government could do something about it. When they introduced the first version of the bill, I will give full credit to them. They invited me to the press conference in March of 2020, and I stood with them at that conference and promised 2 things. The first was, of course, to expedite getting the bill through, as I mentioned, the offer which was never taken up. And the second was to put forward amendments in committee to improve the bill. One of those was to explicitly add gender identity and gender expression to the prohibited forms of conversion therapy. And the second amendment was to introduce the concept of consent. Now, the Liberals were arguing that the Charter might prevent us from banning it for everyone. I don't buy that argument. And in my version of the bill, it would be a complete ban. But okay, once you add the concept of consent to the Liberal bill, it means it is in effect banned because criminal law in Canada is very clear that you can't consent to self-harm, and every form of conversion therapy is a form of self-harm. So when the bill does pass, as it will, and I believe the Liberals will reintroduce it, and I'll be there to introduce it if they don't, What we'll do is we'll have to make sure that we provide resources to the survivors organizations so that they can provide the services that survivors need. And from the beginning, I've been in touch with survivors and talking with survivors, and they're very, very clear that it has to be a program led by survivors so that they can make sure that the trauma-informed counseling isn't generic, but specific to the torture and mental anguish that they were subjected to as part of conversion therapy. This has no place in Canada. There's widespread agreement. I'm committed to getting the job done.
Thank you, Randall Garrison. Faisons place maintenant à Hannah Hudson.
Thank you. First, I'd like to start by being very clear. Conversion therapy is an abhorrent, disgusting practice that has no place in Canada. The idea that someone could or would want to seek to change who I am or who all of us are is terrible and has no place in Canada. I was very proud that Aaron O'Toole voted in favor of the ban, my leader, and that our conservative platform is very clear. The conservative government would ban it as soon as possible. That is what I am campaigning on behalf, and that is what I am proud of. But the reality is that we would already have conversion therapy banned in this country if the Liberal government had chosen to. As Randall said, he offered them to accelerate the bill, and that offer was never taken up. It was first introduced and then died due to prorogation, due to Liberals dodging accountability on the WE scandal. And then it was reintroduced, went through committee, and then the government didn't call it for 3 months. In order to call it just before the election, in order to, knowing that they were going to call an election, in order to use it as an electoral wedge. The reality is, we could have conversion therapy banned in this country right now, as we should, if the government had chosen to. I can commit to everyone listening that as a member of parliament, I will do everything I possibly can to make sure that conversion therapy is banned because it is an abhorrent practice that has zero place in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Hudson. Now, Rob Oliphant.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question. I think there's a little bit of rewriting of history going on in these answers. I want to thank Randall for his support of the bill and his helpful suggestions. But let's be very clear and remember, it was the Conservatives that held it up at committee with odious witnesses, with constant interventions, with constant delay tactics. It's not just up to Randall or the NDP to expedite a process. The House Leaders process is absolutely quite engaging of all parties. It's absolutely critical that, that this process happened. The delay that happened, and remember, the 60% of the Conservative caucus that voted against this bill, they're the problem. This is not a Liberal problem. It's not an NDP problem. It's not a Bloc problem. It's not a Green problem. The problem is the Conservative Party of Canada. It held back. Now, all you have to do is watch the opening debate where I gave a speech and the very closing debate where the government gave me the last word, and Tamara Jansen and her response where she inferred that I and collectively all of us are unclean. That is the attitude that came about in that debate. Hannah, with all due respect, you want to join a club that won't welcome you easily. Believe me, I've watched them from that side. It is a fringe group, but it's not a minority group. It's the majority. Within 100 days, we will reintroduce this bill. We are committed to it. We will even commit to getting it through the Senate, even though Conservative senators refuse to give unanimous consent on the bill. We will get this done. It is not a perfect bill. Randall and I both know that it is not a perfect bill, but sometimes you get the good enough bill to get this thing done. And we will support survivors organizations. Some of them are in the chat group. I know them. I've talked to them. We will be with you. We'll stand with you. It is an odious practice. It is wrong. It is discriminatory. And it is part of an agenda that we will never be a part of. We'll continue to get this work done, and we'll get it done with the help of the NDP, with the help of the Bloc and the Green Party, like we did before, and we'll find a way to stop the Conservatives from blocking it.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant. Maintenant, place à Marie-Hélène Gaudreau.
Sandy, est-ce que c'est à mon tour?
Oui, c'est à vous.
Nous avons la démonstration. On a entendu des faits de ce qui s'est passé dans la dernière législature. On dira ce qu'on voudra et je tiens à reconnaître, j'étais présente quand monsieur Elephant, vous avez reçu ces propos, quand vous avez répondu également que vous maîtrisiez la théologie et que vous étiez vous-même fier d'être homosexuel. En fait, le Québec qui vous a entendu ne comprenait absolument pas comment se fait-il qu'une loi interdisant les thérapies de conversion n'existait même pas encore. Dans l'imaginaire des gens, c'est inconcevable. Alors, peu importe s'il y aura des modulations à faire, ce qui est important, et je dois le dire malheureusement, tout a tombé parce qu'on est en élection. On aurait pu le compléter dans les semaines qui suivent. On aurait pu faire la première étape. La première étape, c'est de cesser. Ensuite, on peut modifier. Et la deuxième, évidemment, c'est d'aider les survivants. Nous sommes en 2021. À chaque fois qu'il y aura un geste concret pour le mieux-être, pour vivre ensemble, les droits fondamentaux de l'être humain, bien, évidemment, on va être là. Alors, moi, j'invite les gens qui nous écoutent, on vous montre un peu comment ça se passe à l'intérieur. Il y a d'énormes pertes de temps et au final, ce sont les gens qui ont des besoins parce que les actions ne sont pas prises. Pourquoi? Par une joute parlementaire. Et ça, je ne me gêne pas de le dénoncer dans mes comités. Il ne faut jamais oublier qui on représente, quelle est la raison pour laquelle nous sommes présents. Et sachez que pour le Bloc et pour moi-même, l'intérêt de l'individu, évidemment du Québec et des Québécoises, c'est exactement ça qu'on a quand on se lève le matin. Alors, soyez vigilants à savoir où on s'en va, quels sont nos grands objectifs et quelles seront les actions concrètes. Et j'invite, en fait, les électeurs à se prononcer lorsque on perd du temps. Pourquoi? C'est pour les gens qui ont certaines vulnérabilités parce que nos projets de loi n'y arrivent pas. Donc, je vous remercie.
Merci Marie-Hélène Gaudreault et maintenant Sylvain Daudier.
Oui, c'est moi. Alors, écoutez, comment vous... D'abord, je pense qu'il faut spécifier là, que le Québec, ce n'est pas un monopole. Okay? Malheureusement, là, les doctrines de suprématie raciale et religieuse, il y en a plein au Québec et on doit se battre avec. Donc ça, il faut faire attention à ça. Moi, je tiens à rappeler que ça fait 154 ans que deux partis politiques s'alternent au pouvoir à Ottawa, inlassablement. S'ils avaient voulu agir pour vrai, ils n'étaient pas obligés d'attendre dans les 6 dernières années pour agir. Ils auraient pu agir avant. Alors, comment ne pas être consterné, et je choisis mon mot, consterné, face aux délais politiques entourant l'interdiction et la condamnation des thérapies de conversion sous toutes leurs formes. Alors, au Parti vert, on considère, vous allez en effet nous trouver s'il y a enfin une loi qui se rend au vote, on va l'appuyer. Autre aberration aussi, et tantôt c'est Mme Hudson qui l'a nommé, mettre fin à l'interdiction discriminatoire, non scientifique et homophobe du don de sang. Alors, des aberrations, il y en a plein et on doit se positionner, mais je vous le réaffirme, je le dis ici, les thérapies de conversion sous toutes leurs formes, c'est non. Et pour venir en aide aux gens, l'importance de soutenir les organismes communautaires qui interviennent dans nos communautés. C'est le seul moyen qu'on va avoir pour accompagner les victimes, les gens qui ont été des survivants, comme on disait tout à l'heure. Non. Voilà, c'est ma réponse.
Merci, Sylvain Daudier. For our next question, I'd like to introduce Jillian Smith, Project Assistant with Justice Trends. Jillian, over to you.
Thanks, Sandy. Data shows a significant overlap between trans and sex working communities, and that trans sex workers are twice as likely to have experienced physical or sexual assault. Given the high rates of sex work and violence against sex workers within two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming communities, how will you and your party work with sex workers, including two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming sex workers, to reform laws to improve their health and safety? Does your party support the complete decriminalization of sex work?
Thank you so much, Jillian. I'd like to invite Marie-Hélène Gaudreau to start us off this time, and followed by Sylvain Daudier, then Hannah Hudson, Rob Oliphant, and lastly, Rendell Garrison.
Merci beaucoup. Ben, en fait, je dois revenir un peu à l'arrière, ce qu'on a vécu avec l'arrêt Bedford, qui, en fait, c'était clair que les effets de criminaliser faisaient en sorte d'augmenter la vulnérabilité. Et vous savez, dans la dernière année, nous avons eu beaucoup de contacts, et même dans le comité éthique et de protection des renseignements personnels lorsqu'on parlait de Pornhub. Alors, on a rencontré les groupes, évidemment, et il est clair que la protection des individus doivent être omniprésentes. Et vous le savez, dans la dernière année, au comité permanent, il y avait eu également un long moment où on a analysé, en fait, en termes de sécurité publique. Malheureusement, on n'a pas eu l'appui pour permettre, et c'est un sujet délicat, c'est un sujet qu'on doit non pas arrêter rapidement les discussions, mais il faut entendre et comprendre. Et pour le moment, j'ai un petit peu de réserve quand on dit qu'on devra s'en occuper. Il y a des propositions, il y a aussi des interventions qui sont valables et efficaces pour maintenir la sécurité, mais évidemment, ça prend un lieu d'échange. Nous avions commencé au comité permanent l'échange en lien avec tout ce qui est diffusion. C'était davantage au niveau juvénile, mais sur le web, et on s'est rendu compte qu'on devait commencer par réfléchir sur la protection des renseignements personnels. Mais c'est beaucoup plus grand que ça. Donc, j'ai hâte de voir le gouvernement choisi, quel sera son leadership pour revisiter et d'aller au fond des choses, pour comprendre ce que le travail du sexe peut amener à certaines personnes dans leur vie de tous les jours, pour éviter ce qu'on vit présentement qui est inacceptable de notre part.
Merci Marie-Hélène Gaudreau. Maintenant, Sylvain Daudier.
La stricte réalité au Canada présentement, c'est que les travailleuses et les travailleurs du sexe vivent et travaillent sous un régime criminel. Dans une approche du prendre soin, pour les Verts, on doit donc agir très rapidement. On doit réformer la loi sur le travail du sexe au Canada en mettant l'accent sur la réduction des risques, compte tenu des dangers auxquels sont confrontés les travailleurs et les travailleuses du sexe, comme on vient de le dire. La légalisation de l'industrie permettra aux travailleuses et aux travailleurs du sexe d'avoir accès aux services sociaux et d'application de la loi en cas de besoin. Il faut aussi, de notre point de vue, augmenter le financement des organismes communautaires qui offrent des services à ces personnes. Et on doit travailler de concert avec les gens, par exemple avec l'Alliance canadienne pour la réforme des lois sur le travail du sexe, qui représente 25 groupes œuvrant avec les travailleuses et les travailleurs du sexe. De mon point de vue, la pudibonderie n'a pas sa place dans la gouvernance du Canada. On doit poser des gestes rapidement, on doit agir pour le mieux-être des gens.
Merci Sylvain Daudier. Now Hannah Hudson. Hi Hannah, can you?
Oh, sorry, I think the translation was late. Oh, no problem. Thank you for the question. I think it's crucial when we examine this issue that we talk about how sex work is a large umbrella of work. So, I think we focus a lot on specifically, the escorting side and the dangers inherent in there. But sex work includes, online sale, camming, many different pornography, many different legal professions that no one is talking, they're 100% legal. So what we need to do is to make sure that these people who are doing it consensually and doing it because they choose to have the ability to have safe working conditions and secure lives. And I think that, when we talk about sex work specifically, I think many things get conflated. I think we all often conflate, unconsensual sex work with consensual, and we need to make sure that we have many resources in place, significantly more resources as the Conservative platform promises to do, to help people who are forced into it or feel like it's their only choice. If someone wants to do, a OnlyFans page, that is a legal thing, that is their right. But they shouldn't feel like that's their only recourse. They shouldn't feel that, because wages are kept low and inflation is increasing and cost of living is increasing, that's all they have to choose. So for people who do choose it, we need protections, and we also need tons of support for people who are forced into it and people who feel it's their only recourse. Sex workers are Canadians and represent a diversity of Canadians, and we need to ensure as a government that we are protecting those who need protection and ensuring those people have access and have protections in terms of their work and being able to make a living. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Hudson. And now Rob Oliphant.
Thank you again for the question. Very clearly, sex work is work. Sex workers are workers, and workers need protection. They need safety, and they need dignity, and they need respect. It's time for us to do the parliamentary review of the former Harper bill, which was Bill C-36. It is time to do that 5-year parliamentary review and to have this discussion. Canadians need to have a discussion about this topic, and that is an appropriate forum to do it. Sex workers need to be involved in that process, and they need to be accorded the dignity and the safety to engage in that public policy. That the former bill was really an anti-prostitution bill that was dressed up to look like something else as it was protecting. Of course, every human being needs protection. Every human being needs safety and needs choice, but we have to respect the choices that people make. And I want to be part of that discussion around the former Bill C-36 and make sure that we're having a conversation that involves all Canadians. So let's talk about it. Let's bring that one out of the closet, and let's talk about valid work, valid compensation, and valid safety for people who need it. And I think while we do that, we also look at those issues of intersectionality that are absolutely critical, because we look at if people are forced into sex work, it is quite different. And if they fall into it because of their vulnerabilities, then we need to help. But let's make sure that we start with the premise that sex work is work. And sex workers are workers, and workers need dignity and respect and safety.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant. And lastly, Rendell Garrison.
Well, thanks very much. There's a sex worker run drop-in center in my riding in Esquimalt called Peers. And I've been working with them for more than a decade, since I was a counselor in Esquimalt. And sex workers have generously taught me about sex work. And as Hannah said, about the diversity of the kinds of work that is sex work, but also about the prevalence of people from our community in sex work and how there are extra dangers for them. But central to what I really learned from meeting with and talking with sex workers very frequently is what they're looking for is rights, not rescue. And so what we really need here, instead of continuing to criminalize sex work, is a strategy that's based on harm reduction and human rights. And we should allow sex workers themselves to take all the measures necessary to keep themselves safe and healthy at work. In 2013, I was the co-author of the resolution passed by the NDP at its convention calling for the complete decriminalization of sex work. And I'm very proud of having gotten my party to explicitly adopt this policy. And we've been working for that in the House of Commons ever since. But as Rob mentioned, soon after that, the Conservatives put forward this bill which fakes protection of the community and instead puts sex workers at greater risk. Now, the review Rob talked about is more than overdue. And so in 2020, I put forward a motion in the House of Commons to start that review. And also a key part for me was to place an ex officio representative from the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform on the committee. So let's not make sex workers just subject to review. Let's make them part of that review. And if we do that, then they can help us call witnesses. They can help us shape the report that finally comes out of this. And if we include sex workers in this review of legislation, we'll get something that actually does help them make their work more safe. I do welcome the ongoing legal challenges to the existing criminalization, and I know there's been some success recently in Ontario courts. But in the meantime, decriminalizing sex work is not something I'm prepared to give up on, and I want to go back and make sure we get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall Garrison. J'aimerais vous présenter Michael Arnaud, le directeur exécutif d'Égide, et il représente le réseau Dignité Canada et la coalition Arc-en-Ciel canadienne pour le refuge. Michael?
Merci Sandy, merci aux candidats et candidates. Ma question sera, dans une grande partie du monde aujourd'hui, les communautés sont confrontées à la criminalisation, à la discrimination, à la violence et à un large éventail de violations des droits de la personne. Dans le cadre de la politique étrangère canadienne, comment votre gouvernement s'emploierait-il à promouvoir et à faire progresser les droits humains des personnes LGBTIQ à l'échelle internationale? Et en outre, sachant que les personnes LGBTQI sont persécutées dans au moins 170 pays dans le monde encore, que ferez-vous pour faire respecter le droit au refuge et faire en sorte que davantage de personnes réfugiées LGBTQI puissent entrer au Canada et s'y établir en toute sécurité, efficacement et avec du soutien? Merci.
Merci, Michael. Pour commencer ce tour, nous allons commencer avec Hannah Hudson, Randall Garrison, Sylvain Daudier, Rob Oliphant et enfin Marie-Hélène Gaudreau.
Thank you for the question. Sorry, it's translation delay. It's a very important one. I think I had a similar experience that I think we probably all had as LGBTQ Canadians, which is looking at where they can travel abroad and seeing the list of countries where it's unsafe being much longer than the list of countries often where it's safe. And that shows how important it is to help people in vulnerable situations all over the world. You know, I'm very proud of one of my close friends and political mentors, Michelle Rempel-Garner, for putting forward a motion in the House several years ago to make permanent the Rainbow Refugee Program, to expand it in order to help more rainbow refugees. Unfortunately, Liberals voted against it at the time. But now, you know, the Conservative platform is committing to making this expanding this program, making it a bigger part of our refugee system to make sure that we are helping refugees from all over the world. And another aspect that I think is very important than the Conservative platform, Canada's Recovery Plan, is to eliminate the requirement that refugees have to escape to another country in order to make a refugee claim. Because often LGBTQ people are in vulnerable positions, and how are they going to escape to make a refugee claim and should be able to make a refugee claim facing discrimination in their own country? I'm very proud that's in a platform. I'm very proud to advocate for that because the Conservative Party has a good history of supporting LGBTQ refugees. And I look forward to continuing that tradition and that history and making sure that we help people in vulnerable situations all over the world to come to Canada, which is, in my opinion, the best place to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Hudson. And now Randall Garrison.
Thanks very much. And again, I'm very happy this question is here. I'm the founding president of the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center, and I've been working with refugees personally and in my community for more than 30 years. When I first got elected, what I had to do was work with sympathetic Conservative cabinet ministers to try and bring about release from prison or rescue from very dangerous situations for individual, usually gay men, who had the resources to get international attention. And I had to do that without publicity because that was the demand from the Conservative government at the time. That continued under the Liberals beginning in 2015. But what I'd quickly begun to understand was that queer refugees need more than one-off rescue programs, which almost always are focused on the privileged in our community. And so full credit needs to go to Rainbow Refugee and the Rainbow Refugee Coalition as community organizations and volunteers who've done so much to get people to safety and to form sponsorship groups to support them here in Canada. But these volunteer and community activities aren't enough. What I've been talking about, and I've been asking the Liberals for since 2015, is creating a permanent path to safety in Canada for queer refugees whose lives are at imminent risk. Now, what does that look like? It means a program to raise awareness in high-risk regions that members of our community can actually file a claim based on sexual orientation or gender identity and expression. It's not something that's well known. Second thing it means is establishing safe places to make those applications. As Hannah said, both within the country and outside the country. Often we know that our refugees from our community are not in refugee camps because they are not safe places. We had the unfortunate circumstance of 3 queer refugees in the Kakuma camp in Kenya waiting for applications to be processed for Canada who were murdered. So we have to provide those safe places to file applications. And it also means then establishing trauma-informed counseling programs that are specific to our community as part of settlement services. It's not good enough, for instance, this happened in my community, to tell a queer Syrian just to go to the language classes with the rest of his community. Not happening. Obviously, there are other important measures we need to take to help strengthen our community organizations in places around the world. And I welcome some of the small initiatives the Liberals have started in this area. And obviously, when we consider things like trade agreements, we need to put rights of our community as one of the criteria for even beginning those trade talks. And we also have to make those a criteria for being included in the human rights protections demanded in those trade agreements. So lots more work to do here. I've worked with 5 different ministers of immigration, and we still can't get this permanent path to safety in Canada.
Thank you, Randall Garrison. Maintenant, Sylvain Daudier.
Excusez mon délai, j'étais avec la traduction. Écoutez, d'abord, au niveau international, je pense que le Canada doit plaider, et là, je choisis encore une fois bien mon mot, je dis bien plaider, au niveau international pour mettre fin à la discrimination et à la violence sanctionnée par certains États à l'égard des personnes LGBTQI2S+. On ne peut plus, en 2021, nous contenter de petits discours ici, de petits discours là, qui ne sont pas mis en pratique. Et il faut se rappeler que quand on travaille à l'international, si on laisse tomber nos partenaires dans nos mesures environnementales, dans toutes sortes de mesures, ben nos partenaires, ils ne nous appuient plus après non plus. Donc, il faut garder une constante dans notre approche et dans nos discours. Le Canada a toujours été une terre d'accueil et au moment où tous s'entendent pour dire qu'entre autres, en raison de la pénurie de la main-d'œuvre, on doit favoriser l'immigration, il y a là une double porte qui s'ouvre pour que le Canada porte haut et fort son discours et accueille massivement les réfugiés LGBTQIS2S. C'est hyper important. On doit donc, entre autres, de mon point de vue, pour ce qui est de tout ce qui est immigration réfugiés, introduire des exceptions pour les frais de demande de résidence permanente et de citoyenneté en fonction du revenu des ménages. Il y a plein de gens qui sont dans des situations épouvantables, ils ne peuvent pas payer les frais qu'on charge. Améliorer les conditions pour les réfugiés et les demandeurs d'asile en s'attaquant au délai des traitements. Est-ce que j'ai besoin de rappeler ici les longs délais dont sont victimes les gens? On doit accroître le soutien en parrainage, c'est nécessaire. Et on doit aussi, quand les immigrants sont acceptés, l'importance de soutenir nos communautés, les organismes communautaires qui viennent en aide à tous ces nouveaux arrivants. C'est important d'agir rapidement, surtout que présentement, on ne peut pas parler d'Afghanistan. Alors, même si les personnes LGBTQIS2+, n'étaient pas des employés du Canada, est-ce qu'on peut faire une voie d'accès? Parce que franchement, vivre avec les talibans pour eux et pour elles, ça ne sera pas évident. Et je pense que le Canada doit là prendre position.
Merci Sylvain Daudier. Maintenant, place à Rob Oliphant.
Thanks. And again, thanks for the question. It gives me a chance to give shout out to the Dignity Network Canada. I've worked with them quite a bit since I've been Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as the collection of rainbow refugee groups and organizations that have been promoting and supporting settlement of LGBTQI refugees in Canada. Two different questions, though. One has to do with our foreign engagement, which I think most people will know that Canada was a founding member and the first co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition. And in that capacity, we started a fund which was $30 million for the first 5 years and $10 million for the next, continuing for the first 4 years and $10 million after that to support local organizations building capacity for human rights. So we were building capacity in Canada through a domestic program. At the same time, we were building capacity around the world, making sure that organizations that were identified as perhaps vulnerable, but certainly lacking funds were supported. That will continue. We continue to speak on the world stage on international human rights issues. We continue to speak in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. We continue to speak bilaterally whenever there is a review being done of a country and its human rights records. We will continue to do that, and we seek allies and friends to do it. We also fund our diplomats, our embassies and high commissions around the world to give funds to local initiatives that are promoting SOGI rights. It's absolutely part of our agenda. Not just words, these are real dollars going to real communities, real community groups, getting work done. So that's on the international side. We will continue to stand as a voice, international human rights. On the refugee side, I do need to say that the request for direct routes has been heard. We will be providing direct routes for refugees to come into Canada who are human rights defenders, who are women, who are journalists, who are otherwise vulnerable people, and that includes sexual minorities as well around the world. That will be a direct route. We'll continue with special programs, but we'll also be opening that door around identify groups that are vulnerable. What I would remind folks is that yes, private sponsorships are important, but when you raise Afghanistan, those are government-sponsored refugees. The Conservatives in their platform have declared they will end government-supported refugees, the GARS program. And this is not getting any traction in this current election. Think about it. The 20,000 that we first announced plus 20,000 more Afghanistan refugees will be government supported. We want to engage communities in their support. The Conservatives will end government supported refugees. We can't do that. Private sponsored refugees, absolutely. Nominated refugees, absolutely critical as well with that blended sponsorship identified. But we also need government sponsored refugees. Canadians want it. It is something that the Conservatives have slipped into this campaign, and we need to declare that this is wrong and this is not what Canadians want.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant. Maintenant, Marie-Hélène Gaudreau.
Mais je vais me permettre d'être brève. Il est clair que les mesures en place pour recevoir des réfugiés, pour recevoir de la réunification familiale par les valeurs que nous avons au Québec et au Canada, bien, force est d'admettre qu'on l'a vu tout le long de la pandémie. On a ce qu'il faut, mais on n'agit pas dans la rapidité nécessaire. Ça m'inquiète beaucoup. Ça m'inquiète beaucoup en ce qui a trait au leadership et à prendre, comme on dit, le taureau par les cornes et d'agir. D'agir, pas après une plaidoirie ou un avertissement collectif qu'il faut poser des gestes. Ça m'inquiète. Donc, évidemment, il faut y aller en se regardant nous-mêmes, à savoir quelle est la connaissance, quel est le lien que nous avons avec les communautés, quelle est la perception aussi, les billets de perception. Quand on parle avec les gens du ministère de l'Immigration, ce n'est pas seulement un enjeu de délai, il y a aussi une énorme connaissance et évidemment une réforme à faire pour tout ce qui est immigration et intégration parce que ces gens-là ont besoin également d'être accompagnés. Alors, toute mesure qui va aller dans ce sens-là, évidemment, nous serons en faveur. Merci.
Merci, Marie-Hélène Gaudreau. For our last question, it's an honor to introduce Micah Jordan, Programming and Engagement Coordinator with Pride at Work. Welcome, Micah.
Thanks, Sandy. So for my question, I'm going to start off with a bit of context. A recent report titled Building the Evidence Base about Economic, Health, and Social Inequities Faced by LGBTQ2S plus individuals in Canada, which was funded by Women and Gender Equality Canada and authored by the SRDC team and Dr. Sean Waite, as well as data from TransPulse Canada's 2019 survey and COVID-specific follow-up survey in 2020. These reports have made it clear that 2S LGBTQIA plus folks are more likely to live in poverty, more likely to experience greater levels of economic insecurity, face greater barriers to employment, and earn less at work, despite often having higher levels of education than their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts. This is especially true for bisexual, trans, non-binary, disabled, Indigenous, Black, and racialized queer and trans communities. With that said, what will your party put forward to address workplace discrimination and economic justice for 2S LGBTQIA plus communities? And how will your party support and uplift 2S LGBTQIA plus small businesses, particularly racialized and trans small business owners? Thank you.
Wonderful. For our last round of questions, thank you, Micah. We'll start with Marie-Hélène Gaudreau, followed by Rob Oliphant, Sylvain Daudier, Randall Garrison, and lastly, Hannah Hudson.
Merci beaucoup. Dans un premier temps, j'ai vu passer une question au sujet de ma position personnelle concernant l'énoncé de notre chef Yves-François Blanchet. Quand on parle du racisme systémique au Québec, bien, en fait, il faut comprendre que c'est en échangeant ensemble et en apprenant à se connaître qu'on va réussir à mieux travailler. Malheureusement, bien qu'on était en gouvernement minoritaire, on avait beaucoup d'échanges. On avait une concertation qui se devait être lorsqu'on a un gouvernement minoritaire. Mais je dois répondre aux gens que malheureusement, c'est plus important qu'on peut l'imaginer dans les relations qu'on peut avoir au Parlement canadien. On a du travail à faire d'inclusion à tous les niveaux. Alors, pour ce qui est de la question, bien, en fait, je pense qu'il faut rapidement s'inspirer des bonnes pratiques pour pouvoir agir. Il faut aussi être très vigilant. Et vous vous souviendrez, dans les dernières décennies, il y avait un enjeu, puis on l'a encore, l'enjeu de parité. Donc, il faut être très vigilant quand on veut se doter d'une façon de faire pour se montrer ouvert à nous avons des représentants de la diversité, des représentants féminins, etc. Donc, il faut trouver un moyen pour que les entreprises aient une vigilance. Mais pour ce faire, il faut se concerter. Et je suis convaincue qu'avec ce qui s'en vient, force est d'admettre qu'on va devoir travailler ensemble pour poser des gestes concrets pour permettre aux entreprises une inclusion. Et si je peux me permettre, bien, au Québec, il y a eu une intervention pan-canadienne dont j'ai participé la semaine dernière sur l'inclusion des personnes avec des vulnérabilités, des handicaps. Bien, il y a des modèles qui existent. Et entre autres, au Québec, on a un modèle d'intégration qui se fait d'une façon tellement inclusive et je pense qu'on pourrait évidemment s'inspirer de modèles qui existent. Merci.
Merci, Marie-Hélène Gaudreau. Et maintenant, Rob Oliphant.
I thank to the Pride Network for that Pride at Work question. It's a complex question because there's several parts of it, including workers, small businesses, entrepreneurs. It's wide ranging, as well as people in precarious work at the lowest end or not working at all, right through to those who would be advancing trade agreements, etc., using the LGBTQ community platforms to do that. I would start with the COVID pandemic. And I think that COVID-19 revealed some tremendous vulnerabilities in our society. Obviously, on the health side, that was quite clear, but also on the economic side. And our government reacted very quickly. Sometimes we tripped over ourselves with goodwill, and we probably didn't have all the right programs at the first, but we recognized immediately that workers needed support, and we developed the CERB. We knew that small businesses needed wage subsidies. It wasn't big enough. We increased it. We knew that students needed support, and we knew that entrepreneurs needed support in a variety of ways, including loan accounts and making sure that they had the money to keep capital flowing in their businesses. As we come out of that, we're looking at other issues that are related to the whole Canadian society, including the 2S LGBTQ2I community. And that has to do with childcare. It has to do with housing, both affordable housing and housing affordability. It has to do with student debt, and it has to do with workers' benefits to make sure that we increase to get people better prepared and better engaged at higher levels of income. It includes a $15 an hour minimum wage for those in federal industries. And it continues to ensure that we have progressive workplace legislation as well as practices and programs. I don't think that we would separate out the LGBTQ community completely from that. We recognize that intersectionality is at play, and that those people who are from various communities that have been underrepresented in Parliament, that have been underserved in our programs, and that have been discriminated against quite violently at times, need to be engaged. But this is a way we're moving forward into the future to ensure that everyone has a chance to move out of precarious employment, out of precarious housing, off the streets, and into a better way of life. And it's a robust question with many parts, so I need about an hour on it, maybe another time.
Thank you so much, Rob Oliphant. And now, Sylvain Doudier.
En effet, vous avez raison de dire que pendant la pandémie, la communauté LGBTQ a été particulièrement touchée. Et on a pu constater qu'il a fallu, pouf, comme ça, tout à coup, créer PCU, PCRE. Alors, au Parti vert, ce qu'on propose, nous, c'est un revenu de base garanti, universel pour tout le monde. Ce qui fait qu'avec la crise sanitaire qu'il y a présentement, avec la crise climatique, parce que ça va s'accélérer, il va en avoir de plus en plus des phénomènes, on a besoin d'avoir un service de base qui garantit à tout le monde une sécurité. Au niveau des petites entreprises, vous me permettrez, parce que je suis moi-même né d'une famille de petits entrepreneurs, je suis un petit entrepreneur dans le milieu culturel. Alors, c'est un sujet qui me tient à cœur et on doit reconnaître que les entreprises créent, c'est l'épine dorsale de l'économie canadienne, les petites entreprises. Donc, c'est hyper important de les appuyer. D'abord, il faut maintenir le taux d'imposition des petites entreprises à un maximum de 9 %. On doit réduire, si vous avez une petite entreprise, vous le savez, la charge administrative des petites entreprises par l'émission des déclarations fiscales, des formations administratives redondantes. Veiller à ce que toutes les nouvelles législations tiennent compte des répercussions sur les petites entreprises, parce que l'avenir du Canada passe par les petites entreprises. Réduire la bureaucratie et simplifier les approbations pour les petites et moyennes entreprises de façon à ce qu'ils puissent beaucoup plus rapidement aussi adopter les nouvelles technologies. On doit promouvoir la formation et le soutien aux entreprises et en particulier auprès des femmes et des diversités. Pour nous, c'est une priorité. Et créer un fonds de capital de risque vert financé par le gouvernement fédéral, doté d'1 milliard de dollars pour soutenir le démarrage viable de petites entreprises vertes locales. On doit aller derrière, soutenir, aider les petites entreprises, sinon on n'arrivera jamais à prendre le virage vert au niveau de l'économie.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvain Doudier. Et maintenant, Randall Garrison.
Well, thanks very much. Like all workers in Canada, workers in our community are suffering from the increased inequality and the growing gap between wages and the cost of living. So the Democrats have put forward several very specific things we want to do. One is reinstating a federal minimum wage set at $20 per hour, and that will help those at the bottom end of our economy the most. A second is we need reform of federal labor standards legislation. So we could bring all those workers in federal jurisdiction, including banks and transportation companies, under the same labor standards. So that means that workers in the so-called gig economy who are contract workers, temporary workers, part-time workers, could be getting access to the same programs that all other workers need, like the Canada Pension Plan, like employment insurance. A third thing we proposed, and I've been working on for 2 parliaments, is adding our community to the Federal Employment Equity Act. And sometimes people are surprised that we're not there, but we are not included. And this is an act that's supposed to make sure that the federal public service actually reflects the faces of Canada, and it doesn't do so right now. And again, having affirmative action programs specifically for our community would have a heavy benefit, or the greatest benefit, I should say, for transgender and non-binary Canadians who face the most severe employment discrimination. And when it comes to small business, I think it's very important to remember that the federal government could be doing more to promote small business through its procurement programs. And I recently met with the Supplier Diversity Alliance Canada group, which has put forward some very practical ways in which we could make sure that government business doesn't just go to big or small businesses which are dominated, frankly, by white Canadians and white straight Canadians. And so those very practical things need to be built into procurement policies. Really, one more thing I do want to say, and that is that at the end of the day, we do need, I agree with the Green Party, a guaranteed basic income. But what the NDP has put forward is 2 proposals, which were the first steps toward that. And that is to raise all people with disabilities out of poverty immediately, along with all seniors. And those will be the first 2 steps, as I said, toward that guaranteed livable income. Thanks.
Thank you, Randall Garrison. And lastly, Hannah Hudson.
Thank you so much for the question. It's really important because, as we know, people in our community face much higher levels of poverty, levels of homelessness, levels of precarious work. And we need to do what we can in order to address those. As many know, a lot of employment standards and workplace protections are provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government can do some things, as many others have mentioned. And I think, advocating for stronger protections is important. One of the things that I'm proud of in the Conservative platform is to protect gig workers by requiring employers to pay into funds like CDP and EI to make sure that there are economic protections for people in a case of lost work, or in case of not being able to, maybe another pandemic, another crisis. So we need to make sure that there are protections in place. In terms of small business, one of the things I'm most proud of in the Conservative platform is the Main Street Revitalization Plan to help investment in small business, to help provide loans to small business, to help them bridge this tough period so that they can, thrive in the future. And one of the things that I think the federal government can do really effectively in this place is, 1 in 40 businesses is LGBTQ owned, should get that number higher. But in terms of procurement, I think that the federal government buys a lot. The federal government has a lot of procurement contracts and puts a lot of money into the economy. And to make sure that they're doing so in a way that isn't just, as we've seen with this current government, rewarding their friends, giving many source contracts to we or to former Liberal MPs for ventilator contracts. We need to make sure that we are doing it in an accountable, a transparent way to ensure that everyone has a fair shot, including LGBTQ businesses, because for many years, basically forever, we've been on the outside looking in. It's time to bring people in and make sure we're all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Now, I'd like to invite each candidate to make a closing statement. And please be mindful to keep your responses under 1 to 2 minutes. On va terminer dans le même ordre qu'on a commencé. Alors, on commencera avec Anna Hudson du Parti conservateur du Canada, Marie-Hélène Gaudreault du Bloc québécois, Randall Garrison du Nouveau Parti démocratique du Canada, Rob Oliphant du Parti libéral du Canada et Sylvain Daudy du Parti vert du Canada.
I thought we were reversing the order, but that's fine.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice, but yes, it's your turn.
Okay, I thought we were reversing. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, it's
okay. It's okay. I think we've had a good debate here. I think we've had a good discussion, a good airing of our positions, and I think that that's very healthy for democracy. So I would like to use my closing statement in order to speak directly to members of the audience, specifically anyone who is watching that is a LGBTQ youth who may be scared to come out, who may be worried about their family or their community. You know, as we see too many LGBTQ youth, specifically trans youth, are kicked out and live in shelters, which is completely unacceptable. I want you to all know that you are perfect and you are loved, and everyone up here, regardless of party, has your back. We will all have your back. We will all fight for you because you are the future of this country and the future of our community. And we need to make sure that we are making this country a better place, a safer place for all people. And I want you to know that it gets better, and don't let anyone diminish your glow and your shine, because we need it. We need you. So thank you for having me here today. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the campaign and the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Hudson. And now, Marie-Hélène Gaudreau.
Oui, si vous me permettez, ça se peut que je déborde. J'ai vraiment été très concise dans mes dernières interventions. Ben, d'emblée, on a parlé de questions très spécifiques, mais je vais me permettre quand même de poser certaines réflexions. Donc, il y a beaucoup d'enjeux dont on a discuté aujourd'hui qui, évidemment, relèvent des provinces. Je pense que quand on parle de respect de la communauté LGBTQI2S+, ben, il faut aussi respecter les juridictions. Et ça va de soi. Et l'ensemble pas l'ensemble, mais plusieurs des propositions qui ont été faites passent, entre autres. Et ça, c'est unanime. Vous allez me dire, encore le Québec. Non, c'est l'ensemble des provinces, incluant le Québec, qui demandent, écoutez, on a de l'expertise terrain, on accompagne, on supporte déjà nos organismes communautaires qui sont là pour vous aider. Ça prend du financement. Le financement, il ne doit pas venir du fédéral. L'accompagnement, et ça, c'est pas moi qui ai décidé ça, hein, on parle de 1867. Là. Donc, on se doit de respecter aussi la législation. Alors, si la volonté politique d'une demande unanime auprès de l'ensemble des provinces, allez voir, allez consulter vos élus sur le terrain, il y aurait déjà un transfert en santé sans condition et aussi une augmentation parce que ça fait déjà des décennies. Hein, vous savez, c'était 50% avant de notre argent du fédéral qui était transféré en santé. Alors là, on viendrait donner le coup de pouce à nos organismes terrain. Et en plus de la santé, bien, quand on parlait de l'accessibilité au logement, bien évidemment, il y a du rattrapage à faire parce que les derniers gouvernements depuis 1995 a complètement délaissé tout ce qui est logement abordable, logements sociaux. Donc, nous, on se dit qu'il faut absolument un réinvestissement de 1% du budget pour non pas entamer les années perdues. C'est pour drastiquement, on l'a vu avec l'inflation, avec la pandémie, et nos aînés. Imaginez les aînés qui ont été délaissés. Le coût de la vie, le panier d'épicerie, l'isolement dont les aînés ont dû vivre et en plus une reconnaissance en fonction de 2 classes d'aînés. Imaginez être transgenre à 72 ans, j'en ai rencontré des gens. S'il y a des gens qui se sentent isolés, bien, permettez-moi que c'est inacceptable ce que on vous a fait vivre. Alors, au final, bien, j'aimerais que vous compreniez que quand on parle de relance économique, quand on parle d'accessibilité, bien, il faut aussi donner les moyens pour que les entreprises puissent avoir des emplois. Des employés, en fait, pas des emplois, parce que des emplois, il y en a comme à pu finir. Je suis aussi entrepreneur. Et moi, je peux vous dire que l'engagement que nous avons eu poursuivre la PCRE jusqu'au 23 octobre, ce n'est pas des gens qui ne sont pas prêts à retourner au travail, c'est parce qu'ils ont des choix. Et pour nous, il faut absolument le suspendre. Ça va nous permettre non seulement une relance, mais d'une ouverture en fonction des besoins qu'on a en main-d'œuvre. Donc, il y a des gestes très concrets qu'il faut mettre en place. Alors, sur ces bons mots, je vous remercie de votre patience et tolérance. Je vous vois et comme je le dis à chaque fois à la Chambre des communes, on vous aime. Vous êtes avec nous et le dialogue va continuer. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Marie-Hélène. Maintenant, place à Randall Garrison.
Thanks very much. I want to thank the organizations who came together to put on this debate. I think it's very important and actually historic that we have an event that raises up the many challenges still facing our community during the national election. And I want to thank my fellow candidates for being here today. And I actually want to particularly thank Hannah for her very personal outreach to youth from our community. Now, at the end, I have to go a little more elbows up here. When I look back at my 10 years in the House of Commons, I can tell you very honestly that I don't remember Conservative, Green, or Bloc MPs ever putting forward a single motion or bill to address the concerns of our community. Sometimes they've supported things put forward by Liberals and New Democrats, but no initiatives put forward by them. And when it comes to Liberals, all I can say is that although we often work very closely together, it always seems to require New Democrats to get them from promises to action. In this election, New Democrats are running the most diverse slate of 2S LGBTQ plus candidates and the largest number we've ever put forward, 26 of us from all regions of the country and all orientations and identities. Many are running in very winnable ridings like Edmonton-Griesbach, Regina-Louvain, Beauport-Limoilou, and Yukon. Representation matters. We hope to exceed our previous high of 5 out New Democrats, but when the election is over, whatever the outcome, you can count on Jagmeet and New Democrat MPs to be there fighting for you. Thanks.
Thank you, Randall Garrison. And now Rob Oliphant.
Thank you, Sandy, and thanks to the organizers, to the questioners, to my colleagues, my panelist colleagues, and to those who have joined in to this conversation that we're having. In my mind are a couple of thoughts, and one is that most of my adult life has been spent as an advocate, 25 years, working, advocating for positions, advocating for my community, our community, advocating for many in our society. A relatively smaller amount of time, 8.5 years, has been spent as a parliamentarian. I've been in opposition and I've been in government. And while opposition can be fun, government is tough and hard work. We're made better by opposition parties that work solidly with us, and we're made better by advocates that continually reach out to us. Ours is a government, and our party is a party that will continually try to work with advocacy groups, international ones, domestic ones, very local ones, private organizations, every part of our community to hear, to listen, to engage, and to make our world better. But I want to close with one question. When you look at the ballots that are coming up, which of the two parties that have a realistic chance of forming a federal government will be the one that opens the door to this community, will be the one that engages with advocacy groups, brings them to the table to make sure the action plan is done, which is the one which will engage with other parties in the House of Commons to try to make our legislation better? And I believe that's the Liberal Party of Canada. I do want our small club that Randall and Seamus and Eric and I are in to be bigger. It's not big enough. And I wouldn't want the party to always hear this, but I hope that there are members in every party who are part of our community. It makes a better parliament. It's a lonely place with 4 white men, cisgender men who are the gay caucus, and it puts a huge burden on us. What we try to do, though, is expand our circle outside the parliament. I've not had a chance. I've been able to glance at the chat a few times, but I've been trying to listen to my colleagues and do that respectfully. I haven't caught everything. I've caught parts of it. I've caught some of the questions and answers. Reach out to me. Reach out to me, Rob at roboliphant.ca. I'm happy to engage further with you. Check out our platform. You'll see money is in there for the community groups that you're a part of, and reach beyond our borders to a world that needs more Canada. We have tough things still ahead of us as in our community in Canada, but it's nothing compared to some 80 or 90 countries in the world where discrimination is rampant. Let's band together. Let's be kinder to each other, and let's try to move our whole community ahead, regardless of what party we support. Thanks again to everybody.
Thank you, Rob Oliphant, and now Sylvain Doudier.
Nous sommes en pleine crise sanitaire et en pleine crise climatique. Et comme moi, vous et moi, on le voit qu'on est en pleine crise climatique, on le ressent tous les jours, on a juste à ouvrir notre fenêtre, à sortir dehors, on le sait. Et vous savez aussi comme moi que quand ces crises-là sont, surtout quand elles sont mondiales, ce sont toujours les droits de la personne qui écopent en premier. La crise climatique actuelle oblige le gouvernement canadien à agir de façon rapide. Les changements climatiques sont exponentiels. Si rien n'est rapidement fait, cette crise climatique-là va se transformer en immense crise humanitaire sans précédent. On en voit déjà un peu partout sur la planète de ces crises humanitaires. C'est la survie de l'espèce humaine elle-même qui est en jeu. Je tiens donc à vous rappeler que dans le cadre de cette élection-là, le Parti vert du Canada est le seul parti qui propose des cibles de réduction des gaz à effet de serre qui vont dans le même sens que nos partenaires internationaux, l'Union européenne, le Royaume-Uni et même les États-Unis. Le Canada doit réduire impérativement ses émissions de 60% d'ici 2030 et atteindre l'objectif zéro d'ici 2050. Le Canada a tout ce qu'il faut pour être le leader mondial face à la crise climatique, exactement comme il a tout ce qu'il faut pour être le leader mondial dans les droits des communautés LGBTQIS2S. Les droits de la personne des communautés LGBTQ doivent être observés globalement dans la perspective des crises que nous vivons présentement. C'est l'activité humaine qui est responsable de la crise climatique. Donc, ce sont les actions humaines qui vont nous permettre de nous en sortir. Je tiens vraiment à remercier le consortium qui a organisé cet événement. Merci beaucoup à Sandy pour votre animation. J'ai été heureux d'être avec vous. Si vous avez des questions à me poser, sylvaindaudier.com, vous pouvez aller sur le site de Parti vert Canada aussi pour trouver les réponses. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvain Doudier. Pour ma part, en tant que femme lesbienne, ça a été un honneur pour moi de faire partie de la discussion. De tout ce qu'on a entendu aujourd'hui, tout ce que je peux vous dire à vous tous les candidats, c'est qu'on a parlé, ça fait longtemps que je fais partie des organisations, on a écouté et on est à la phase la plus importante pour le changement dans la bonne direction, c'est l'action. Alors, je souhaite à tous les partis, peu importe le parti qui va être élu, d'agir et surtout travailler ensemble parce que des vies et la dignité des gens faisant partie des communautés de LGBTQ+, est entre vos mains. So to everyone, all the voters, please vote. It's time for your voice to be heard. As we come to a close, I would like to share my heartfelt thanks to our panelists for taking the time to join us this afternoon to share their party's commitments to the 2S LGBTQ+ communities. Let's take a moment to give them a round of applause or emojis in your toolbar. I would also like to thank our partners, including the Enchanté Network, Fierté Canada Pride, Pride at Work Canada, the Canadian Centre for Sexual and Gender Diversity, le Conseil québécois LGBT, the Canadian Rainbow Coalition for Refuge, Justice Trends, the CGLCC, Canada's LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce, Égal Canada, Proud Politics, Dignity Network Canada. We are equally thankful for your sponsorship and support of the Extra magazine, our media sponsor, and Wisdom to Action, our logistics sponsor. Everyone, when we are all seated at the table in our diverse authenticity, that's when change happens. So in particular, I'd like to thank our interpreters as well, Jack and Michael. And finally, our audience. Thank you for participating, for joining us. We are listening, we spoke, and now it's time for action. The election is just days away, so please don't forget, vote and vote proudly. Thank you, merci, et passez une excellente journée. À la prochaine.